Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about a significant diplomatic event that is unfolding right now in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. President Donald Trump has just arrived at the 47th Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit, marking his first trip to the Asia-Pacific region since returning to the White House in January 2025. This visit is not just another diplomatic engagement. It represents a critical moment in American foreign policy towards Southeast Asia, and it comes at a time of unprecedented geopolitical complexity. The U.S.-China trade war, territorial disputes in the South China Sea, and regional security challenges form the backdrop of this summit. Over the next 40 minutes, I will break down the key elements of this summit. We will explore why Trump is there, what he hopes to achieve, the major players involved, and most importantly, what outcomes we can expect and their potential impacts on regional and global dynamics. Let me start by setting the stage. ASEAN is a regional bloc comprising 10 Southeast Asian nations: Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Brunei. This year, they are welcoming their 11th member, Timor-Leste, also known as East Timor. This is the first time ASEAN has expanded in 26 years, making this summit particularly historic. The summit runs from October 26th through October 28th, and Malaysia, as this year's rotating chair, has pulled out all the stops. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has assembled what many are calling the most high-profile gathering of world leaders in ASEAN's history. Alongside Trump, we have Chinese Premier Li Qiang, Russian President Vladimir Putin, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. But here is the elephant in the room. Trump has historically shown little interest in ASEAN. During his first term, he attended only one ASEAN summit in the Philippines in 2017, and he left before the East Asia Summit, which is considered the most important event for U.S. presidents during these gatherings. His attendance record in 2018, 19, and 20 was 0. So why is he there now? The answer tells us everything about Trump's approach to foreign policy and what we can expect from this summit. Trump's primary reason for attending this summit is remarkably straightforward. He wants to preside over the signing of what is being called the Kuala Lumpur Accord, a peace agreement between Thailand and Cambodia. In fact, according to reports, this peace deal may be the only reason Trump agreed to attend the summit at all. Let me provide some background. In July 2025, a border conflict erupted between Thailand and Cambodia over a disputed temple complex. The 5-day conflict was devastating. At least 43 people were killed, including 8 civilians at a convenience store and petrol station hit by Cambodian artillery in the Thai border province of Sisaket. More than 300,000 people were displaced. The conflict ended with a ceasefire that was brokered in July, with significant involvement from Malaysia, China, and the United States. However, Trump has largely taken credit for ending the conflict. He has framed himself as the peacemaker, and now he wants the world to see him in that role. Here is what we know. Trump insisted that he would only attend the ASEAN summit if he could preside over the formal signing of this peace deal. Moreover, according to reports, he requested that Chinese officials not be present at the ceremony, despite China playing a major role in the ceasefire negotiations. This request is significant because it reveals Trump's desire to claim sole credit and to visibly compete with Chinese influence in the region. As of this morning, Trump has officially witnessed the signing of this ceasefire agreement. Both Thailand and Cambodia signed the Kuala Lumpur Accord, giving Trump the diplomatic victory he sought. However, the road to this moment was not smooth. Thailand's new Prime Minister, Anutin Charnvirakul, who came to power after the previous government was ousted over its handling of the conflict, has been cautious. He stated publicly that Thailand would not let the country be taken advantage of by neighboring countries or any other nation. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim said just days ago that details of the agreement were still being ironed out. This raises important questions. Is this peace deal sustainable? Does it address the underlying territorial dispute, or is it merely a ceremonial pause? And what does it mean that Trump conditioned his attendance on this event? The answer to these questions will shape not just Thai-Cambodian relations, but also perceptions of American engagement in Southeast Asia. If the peace holds, Trump can legitimately claim a foreign policy victory. If it collapses, it will be seen as a superficial publicity stunt that undermined serious diplomacy. Beyond the peace deal, Trump's visit is fundamentally about economics and trade. This is where the real substance of his engagement with Southeast Asia lies, and it is where we will see the most significant outcomes. Let me be clear. Trump's approach to trade is transactional. He views trade relationships through the lens of bilateral deals, tariffs, and immediate economic gains for the United States. This stands in contrast to the multilateral, rules-based approach that has characterized U.S. engagement with Asia for decades. At this summit, Trump is not just talking trade. He is signing deals, and these deals are substantial. Following the ceasefire signing, Trump inked separate trade agreements with Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand, as well as agreements on critical minerals with Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur. Here are the specifics. Thailand has committed to purchasing $2.6 billion per year in U.S. farm products, $5.4 billion per year in U.S. energy products, and 80 U.S. aircraft worth $18.8 billion. Cambodia has pledged to work with Boeing to support Cambodia's aviation ecosystem development. Malaysia has committed to buying up to $3.4 billion per year in liquefied natural gas from the U.S., plus $200 million per year in coal and telecommunication products. Malaysia will also purchase 30 aircraft from the U.S., with an option for 30 more, and make capital fund investments in the U.S., totaling $70 billion. These are massive numbers. They represent real economic commitments and real jobs in American industries. But there is a catch. Under these agreements, all three countries have pledged to remove most trade barriers on U.S. exports, particularly agricultural products. However, U.S. tariffs on these three Southeast Asian countries remain at 19%. This asymmetry is important. It reflects Trump's leverage and his willingness to maintain tariffs as a tool of economic pressure. It also suggests that these deals are not about creating a level playing field, but about extracting concessions that favor American exporters. Now let me address the elephant in the room. Malaysia had been hoping to sign a reciprocal trade agreement with the U.S. during Trump's visit. Whether such an agreement materializes in its fullest form remains to be seen, but the investments Malaysia has committed to suggest they are paying a price for Trump's attendance and attention. There is another critical dimension to the economic agenda, and that is rare earth minerals. Rare earths are essential for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles to military equipment. China currently dominates global rare earth production and processing, controlling about 70% of global mining and 90% of processing. The U.S.-China trade war has made access to rare earths a strategic imperative for Washington. Trump has threatened 100% tariffs on Chinese goods, and in response, China has expanded export controls on rare earth magnets and minerals. Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam and Malaysia, has significant rare earth deposits and could serve as an alternative supply source. The agreements Trump has signed with Thailand and Malaysia include provisions on critical minerals. These agreements are not just about economics. They are about strategic supply chains and reducing American dependence on China. This is a long-term play that will shape U.S.-Southeast Asian relations for years to come. To understand Trump's presence at the ASEAN Summit, we need to place it in the context of his broader Asia strategy. This is not just a standalone visit. It is part of a 6-day trip that will take him to Japan and South Korea, culminating in his meeting with Xi Jinping. After leaving Malaysia, Trump will travel to Japan, where he will meet newly sworn-in Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Japan is one of America's closest allies in Asia, and the U.S.-Japan Security Alliance is a cornerstone of regional stability. However, Trump has historically been critical of alliances, viewing them as burdens on American taxpayers. During his first term, Trump pressured Japan and South Korea to pay more for U.S. military presence. He has taken a similar approach in his second term. The question is whether he will use his meeting with Prime Minister Takaichi to extract additional financial commitments from Japan. From Japan, Trump will travel to South Korea for the APEC Summit. This is where the anticipated Trump-Xi meeting will take place. The stakes could not be higher. The outcome of this meeting will shape global trade, technology policy, and regional security for the foreseeable future. Interestingly, thousands of South Korean protesters are planning rallies in Seoul to condemn Trump's tariff policies and pressure on South Korea to invest in the U.S. This mirrors the protests in Malaysia and underscores the complexity of Trump's relationship with Asia. Trump's Asia strategy can be summarized in 3 words: leverage, competition, and transactions. He is leveraging American economic and military power to extract concessions. He is competing with China for influence and access to markets and resources. And he is pursuing transactions, specific deals that deliver tangible benefits, rather than building multilateral frameworks. This approach has strengths and weaknesses. On the one hand, it can produce quick wins and visible results. The trade deals announced in Kuala Lumpur are examples of this. On the other hand, it can undermine long-term relationships and create unpredictability that makes countries hesitant to rely on the United States. Now, let me turn to the possible outcomes of this summit. What can we realistically expect, and what are the potential scenarios? First, the peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia has been signed. This is a done deal, and it gives Trump the diplomatic victory he sought. However, the sustainability of this peace is uncertain. The underlying territorial dispute has not been resolved. If tensions flare again, the Kuala Lumpur Accord will be seen as a superficial gesture rather than a meaningful resolution. Second, the trade deals with Malaysia, Cambodia, and Thailand represent significant economic commitments. These deals will boost American exports in agriculture, energy, and aerospace. However, they also lock these countries into dependency on American markets and products. If the deals deliver economic benefits to all parties, they will strengthen U.S. Southeast Asian relations. If they are perceived as one-sided or exploitative, they could generate resentment. Third, the rare earth minerals agreements are strategically important. They represent the beginning of a long-term effort to diversify supply chains and reduce dependence on China. However, developing rare earth production and processing capacity takes years and requires significant investment. The success of these agreements will depend on sustained commitment and follow-through. Fourth, Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping in South Korea could produce a breakthrough on tariffs and trade. If the two leaders reach an agreement that reduces tariffs and stabilizes economic relations, it would be a major positive development for the global economy. However, it could also involve compromises on issues like Taiwan, technology controls, and human rights that would be controversial. Fifth, the broader U.S.-ASEAN relationship could either strengthen or weaken based on Trump's engagement. If ASEAN leaders feel that Trump is genuinely interested in the region and willing to invest in long-term partnerships, they will be more likely to align with Washington. If they feel that Trump is only there for photo opportunities and transactional deals, they will hedge their bets and maintain close ties with China. Sixth, the domestic reactions in Malaysia and South Korea to Trump's visit could influence future American engagement in the region. If protests are large and sustained, they will send a signal that American policies, particularly on Israel and trade, are unpopular. This could make future visits and agreements more difficult to negotiate. Let me outline 3 possible scenarios for how this summit and its aftermath could unfold. Scenario 1. The optimistic scenario. In this scenario, the peace deal between Thailand and Cambodia holds, and the two countries begin substantive negotiations on their territorial dispute. The trade deals deliver economic benefits to all parties, creating jobs and boosting growth. Trump's meeting with Xi produces a tariff reduction agreement that eases trade tensions and stabilizes global markets. ASEAN countries feel that the United States is a reliable partner, and they deepen their security and economic ties with Washington. This scenario would represent a significant win for Trump and for American influence in Asia. Scenario 2. The muddled middle. In this scenario, the peace deal is maintained but remains fragile, with periodic tensions and incidents. The trade deals are implemented, but they produce mixed results, with some sectors benefiting while others struggle. Trump's meeting with Xi yields modest progress on tariffs, but does not resolve fundamental issues. ASEAN countries continue to hedge, maintaining relationships with both the U.S. and China without committing fully to either. This scenario represents continuity rather than transformation. Scenario 3. The pessimistic scenario. In this scenario, the peace deal collapses within months, and fighting resumes between Thailand and Cambodia. The trade deals are criticized as one-sided and generate backlash in Southeast Asia. Trump's meeting with Xi ends without agreement, and the trade war escalates. ASEAN countries conclude that the United States is unreliable and pivot more decisively toward China. This scenario would represent a significant setback for American interests in the region. Which scenario is most likely? Based on the evidence and the patterns of Trump's foreign policy, I believe the muddled middle is the most probable outcome. Trump will achieve some tactical wins, but he will not fundamentally transform the regional dynamics or build the kind of sustained, multilateral partnerships that create lasting stability. No analysis of Trump's ASEAN visit would be complete without discussing China. Indeed, the entire summit is taking place in the shadow of the U.S.-China rivalry, and every move Trump makes must be understood in that context. Let me start with the obvious. Trump's request that Chinese officials be excluded from the peace deal signing ceremony is a clear signal. He wants to demonstrate American influence in Southeast Asia independent of and in competition with China. This is classic great power politics, and it puts ASEAN countries in an uncomfortable position. These nations do not want to choose between the United States and China. They want to engage with both. China is their largest trading partner. Chinese investment has poured into the region through the Belt and Road Initiative. At the same time, many ASEAN countries have security concerns about Chinese assertiveness in the South China Sea and value their relationships with Washington. Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, has been very explicit about this balancing act. He has described diplomacy as practical work for advancing his country's interests in an imperfect world. He said it demands balance, discipline, and the courage to stay the course even when the ground shifts. This is not just rhetoric. It is a survival strategy for middle powers navigating great power competition. But the China question goes much deeper than the peace ceremony. On the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit, top economic officials from the U.S. and China kicked off talks on Saturday. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng are meeting to chart a path forward after Trump's tariff threats and China's rare earth export controls. These talks are laying the groundwork for a high-stakes meeting between Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. This meeting is scheduled for Thursday at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea. It would be Trump's first face-to-face meeting with Xi since 2019. Trump has confirmed that Taiwan will be among the topics discussed with Xi. When asked by reporters whether he would consider changing U.S. policy on Taiwan, Trump said he did not want to talk about that now. He said he did not want to create any complexity and that the trip is already complex enough. This is revealing. It suggests Trump understands how sensitive the Taiwan issue is, but it also leaves open the possibility of policy shifts. Trump also said it would be very dangerous for China to make any move on Taiwan. This is important. It maintains strategic ambiguity, which has been the cornerstone of U.S. policy, but it also reflects Trump's transactional approach. Everything is potentially on the table. The broader question is what Trump hopes to achieve with China. The talk in Kuala Lumpur and the anticipated meeting in South Korea could produce deals on tariffs, technology controls, and Chinese purchases of U.S. soybeans. These would be tactical wins, but they would not resolve the fundamental strategic competition between Washington and Beijing. For ASEAN countries, the U.S.-China dynamic is both an opportunity and a risk. They can extract benefits from both powers, but they also face pressure to align. Trump's presence in Kuala Lumpur and the way he is positioning American engagement will influence how these countries navigate their choices. Let me now turn to regional security, which is one of the most pressing issues for ASEAN countries. The South China Sea dispute looms large over this summit. China claims almost the entire South China Sea based on its 9-dash line, which overlaps with claims by Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, And Brunei. China has built artificial islands and militarized them with runways, radar systems, and missile installations. This has created tensions and raised fears of military confrontation. The United States, which does not claim territory in the South China Sea but asserts freedom of navigation rights, has conducted regular naval patrols to challenge Chinese claims. For ASEAN countries, this is not an abstract geopolitical issue. It affects fishing rights, energy exploration, and maritime trade routes. The South China Sea is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and any conflict there would have catastrophic economic consequences. Trump's approach to the South China Sea during his first term was inconsistent. He conducted freedom of navigation operations, but he also sought to cultivate a personal relationship with Xi Jinping. In his second term, Trump's policy appears more confrontational, driven by the broader trade war and strategic competition with China. At the ASEAN Summit, leaders are expected to discuss maritime security and the South China Sea dispute. The question is whether Trump will offer any new commitments or frameworks for addressing these tensions. Historically, ASEAN has preferred multilateral approaches, such as the Code of Conduct negotiations with China, but progress has been slow. Trump's transactional style does not lend itself well to multilateral diplomacy. He prefers bilateral deals where he can exert maximum leverage. This could frustrate ASEAN's efforts to present a united front on the South China Sea issue. There is another security issue that deserves attention, and that is Myanmar. Myanmar has been in crisis since the military coup in February 2021. The military government has committed widespread atrocities against civilians, and the country is now in a state of civil war. ASEAN has been unable to effectively address the Myanmar crisis. The bloc's principle of non-interference in internal affairs has limited its options. However, Malaysia's foreign minister announced that ASEAN is considering sending election observers to Myanmar, where polls are expected later this year under the military government. Human Rights Watch has urged governments attending the summit to reject the Myanmar military's election plans, calling them a sham. The question is whether Trump and other leaders will take a strong stance on Myanmar. Given Trump's reluctance to prioritize human rights in foreign policy, it seems unlikely that he will push hard on this issue. One of the most sensitive aspects of Trump's visit to Malaysia is the Palestinian issue. Malaysia is a Muslim-majority country where support for Palestinians is strong and vocal. U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza has been a major source of tension, and it has inspired frequent public protests in Malaysia. In the run-up to the summit, critics demanded that Prime Minister Anwar rescind Trump's invitation due to his role in supporting the war. Former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, who has a complicated history with Anwar, said in a video message that a person like Trump, no matter how powerful, should not be welcomed in Malaysia. A United Nations Commission of Inquiry recently determined that Israel's actions in Gaza constitute genocide. This has intensified the anger and moral outrage in Malaysia and across the Muslim world. For Anwar, hosting Trump is politically risky. However, Anwar has defended the invitation by stressing his view of diplomacy as practical work for advancing Malaysia's interests. He has also praised Trump for helping to broker a ceasefire in Gaza, which he described as near impossible under normal terms. Anwar plans to raise the Palestinian issue directly with Trump during the summit, acknowledging that the truce has not resolved the underlying question. Security has been ramped up across Kuala Lumpur ahead of planned protests against Trump's visit. Anwar has said the government will allow peaceful demonstrations, but vowed that the meetings will proceed smoothly. This is a delicate balance. Anwar must show that Malaysia is a stable and welcoming host, while also respecting the right of citizens to express their views. The Palestinian issue highlights a broader challenge for Anwar and for ASEAN countries more generally. They must engage with the United States for economic and security reasons, but they also have domestic constituencies with strong views on American foreign policy. Managing this tension requires skillful diplomacy and clear communication. For Trump, the protests and criticism are unlikely to change his approach. He has shown little concern for international public opinion when he believes his policies serve American interests. However, the visibility of the Palestinian issue in Malaysia serves as a reminder that American actions have global repercussions. Let me now zoom out and consider the broader implications of Trump's ASEAN visit for the global order. This summit is not happening in isolation. It is part of a larger pattern of great power competition, shifting alliances, and the erosion of multilateral institutions. The presence of leaders from Brazil, South Africa, Russia, and Italy at the ASEAN Summit reflects Malaysia's effort to expand ASEAN's partnerships beyond traditional powers. This is significant. It suggests that middle powers are seeking to diversify their relationships and create new networks that are not dominated by the U.S. or China. This trend aligns with the rise of the Global South and the growing influence of organizations like BRICS, which now includes countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE. These countries are seeking greater autonomy and a more multipolar world order. Trump's transactional approach to diplomacy fits awkwardly with this trend. On the one hand, he is willing to engage with any country that offers a good deal. On the other hand, his emphasis on American interests and his disdain for multilateralism can alienate countries that seek partnerships based on mutual respect and shared values. The ASEAN Summit highlights a fundamental tension in international relations today. Countries want the benefits of engagement with major powers, but they do not want to be forced to choose sides. They want autonomy and flexibility. Trump's approach, which often demands clear alignment and loyalty, runs counter to this desire. Another implication concerns the future of international institutions and norms. Trump has consistently undermined multilateral institutions, from the United Nations to the World Trade Organization to NATO. His preference for bilateral deals weakens these institutions and creates a more fragmented and unpredictable international system. For ASEAN, this is a challenge. The bloc was founded on principles of multilateralism and collective decision-making. If the major powers abandon multilateral frameworks in favor of bilateral deals and power politics, ASEAN's relevance diminishes. Finally, Trump's visit raises questions about the role of values in foreign policy. The protests in Malaysia over the Palestinian issue and the criticisms of Trump's support for Israel reflect a broader debate about whether foreign policy should be guided by moral principles or purely by interests. Trump has made clear that he prioritizes American interests, often defined narrowly in economic and security terms. This approach has domestic political appeal, but it can create friction with countries and populations that prioritize human rights, justice, and international law. Conclusion. Let me bring this all together and offer some final thoughts. Trump's attendance at the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur is a significant moment in Asia-Pacific geopolitics. It reveals the priorities of the Trump administration, the complexities of great power competition, and the challenges facing middle powers in navigating a turbulent international landscape. Trump came to Malaysia for a peace deal and he got it. He came for trade deals and he signed them. He came to compete with China and he made his presence felt. But the deeper question is whether this visit will lead to sustained American engagement in Southeast Asia, or whether it will be remembered as a transactional episode that failed to build lasting partnerships. The outcomes of this summit will unfold over months and years. The sustainability of the Thailand Cambodia peace deal, the implementation of the trade agreements, the results of the Trump-Xi meeting, and the reactions of ASEAN countries will all determine whether this summit was a success or a missed opportunity. What is clear is that Southeast Asia is not a secondary theater in global politics. It is a region of immense economic dynamism, strategic importance, and geopolitical complexity. The countries of ASEAN are not passive actors waiting to be courted by great powers. They are active agents shaping their own destinies and demanding to be treated as partners, not pawns. For the United States, the challenge is to engage with Southeast Asia in a way that respects the region's diversity, autonomy, and aspirations. This requires more than transactional deals. It requires sustained attention, genuine partnership, and a willingness to invest in multilateral frameworks that create stability and prosperity for all. For Trump, this summit represents an opportunity to demonstrate that he can be more than a deal-maker. He can be a statesman who understands the long-term strategic importance of Asia and who is willing to build the kind of relationships that endure beyond a single administration. Only time will tell whether he rises to that challenge. But one thing is certain, the world is watching, and the stakes could not be higher. Thank you for your attention.